In 1996, a 7-year-old girl named Lily Miller vanished from a community center in her idyllic hometown of Harmony Creek, Ohio. The case went cold, leaving behind a heartbroken mother and a town haunted by questions. For 25 years, the truth remained buried, locked away in silence. It would take the demolition of an old, abandoned building to finally uncover a child's final secret message and expose a monster who had been hiding in plain sight all along. It all began on October 12, 1996, the kind of autumn day that Harmony Creek specialized in. The air was crisp, the sky was a deep, cloudless blue, and the maple trees that lined Meadow Creek Park had exploded into shades of fire and gold. It was a perfect Saturday, a portrait of small-town American life. And at the heart of that portrait was 7-year-old Lily Miller, a little girl who held a universe of color inside her. Lily had been born into a world of silence. Profoundly deaf since birth, she'd never heard the laughter in the park or the sound of her mother's voice. But her eyes missed nothing. They saw the intricate patterns on a dragonfly's wing, the way sunlight filtered through the leaves, the subtle shift in a person's expression. Her hands were her voice, dancing through the air in the language she shared with her mother, Sarah. But her truest voice, the one that spoke with unfiltered clarity, was her art. Her sketchbook was a catalog of her soul, filled with vibrant, happy creatures and colors. That seemed brighter than life itself. That afternoon, the Meadow Creek Community Center was buzzing with activity. A massive mural project was underway, an attempt to capture the spirit of the town's children on a sprawling interior wall. And Lily was in her element. She had claimed a small section for herself and, with intense focus, was painting a bird. It was a radiant yellow, with wings of the most brilliant blue, a creature of pure joy. Her mother, Sarah, watched from a nearby bench, a soft smile on her face. To see her daughter so completely absorbed, so happy, was everything. In the periphery, a familiar figure moved with quiet efficiency. Arthur Peterson, the town janitor. He was a man who seemed to blend into the background of Harmony Creek itself, always there, never truly noticed. With his sloped shoulders, thick glasses, and quiet demeanor, he was simply Arthur, the man who swept the floors and locked the doors. He offered a shy smile in Sarah's direction, then approached Lily, tapping her gently on the shoulder. He held out a fresh, clean piece of drawing paper, a gesture of kindness for the little artist. Lily beamed, signing a quick "thank you" before placing the special paper next to her paint set. For Sarah, it was just another small, sweet moment in a town full of them. It was then that another parent, Linda, sat down next to Sarah, launching into a question about the upcoming school bake sale. The conversation was trivial, a simple back and forth about cookies and fundraising that lasted no more than 90 seconds. Sarah's attention was split, one part listening, the other keeping a watchful eye on her daughter. She laughed at a comment Linda made, her gaze drifting away from the mural for just a moment, a single, insignificant moment. When she turned back, the space where Lily had been standing was empty. The change was so sudden, so absolute, it didn't immediately register. Sarah's eyes scanned the spot, expecting to see Lily crouched on the floor reaching for a different color. But there was nothing, just her daughter's paintbrush resting in a jar of murky brown water. The little yellow bird on the wall, its blue wings half finished, seemed to be waiting. A flicker of annoyance was the first feeling. Lily knew she was supposed to stay right there. Sarah stood up, her heart not yet racing, and formed Lily's name sign in the air, a gentle, familiar wave. There was no response. She walked over to the wall, her footsteps echoing slightly in the noisy room. She checked the nearby arts and crafts room, a mess of glitter and glue. She pushed open the door to the ladies' restroom, calling Lily's name sign into the empty space. Nothing. The annoyance began to sour into a low, quiet hum of concern. She approached a group of parents. "Have you seen Lily?" she asked, her voice steady. They all shook their heads, offering sympathetic but unhelpful glances. She spotted Arthur Peterson by the water fountain, slowly filling a bucket. "Arthur, "Did you see where Lily went?" He looked up, his brow furrowed with what appeared to be genuine concern. "Why, no, Sarah," he said, his voice soft. "She was right there at the wall just a minute ago. Maybe she went outside to the playground." The word outside sent a jolt through Sarah. The playground, of course. She pushed through the double doors, a wave of cool autumn air hitting her face. The playground, bustling just an hour before, was now sparsely populated. A few toddlers, their parents packing up for the day. Sarah's eyes darted everywhere, frantically searching for a small red coat. She called Lily's name sign again, bigger this time, more desperate. The hum of concern was now a cold, heavy stone in her stomach. This wasn't right. Lily would have told her she would never just wander off. Sarah began to walk, then trot, then run, circling the swing sets and the slide, her head whipping back and forth. The world, which had been so bright and safe just minutes before, had turned menacing. Every shadow seemed to hold a threat. The rustle of leaves sounded like a footstep. The perfect autumn day had fractured, and through the cracks a terrifying, silent darkness was pouring in. She was screaming Lily's name now, the sound swallowed by the vast, indifferent blue sky. Her daughter was gone. The days that followed the fracture were a blur of flashing lights, methodical searches, and the cold, impersonal language of a police investigation. Harmony Creek, a town that prided itself on safety, was reeling. For Sarah, it was a waking nightmare. Detectives sat in her living room, their questions feeling less like an investigation and more like an audit of her life. They asked about Lily's father, an ex-husband who lived 3 states away and hadn't seen his daughter in years. They asked about arguments, about debts, about anyone who might have held a grudge against Sarah. In their search for a motive, they seemed to be searching for a flaw in her, a reason why tragedy would strike her family. It felt like an accusation. The only flicker of hope came from Arthur Peterson. The janitor, brought in for questioning as one of the last people to see Lily, was the picture of a heartbroken witness. He told the detectives, his voice heavy with sorrow, about a strange car he had noticed parked by the edge of the woods that afternoon, a nondescript brown sedan, a model he didn't recognize. The driver, he said, had seemed out of place, watchful. It was the first tangible lead the police had, a concrete detail in a case built on thin air. They seized upon it. Patrol cars began searching for the phantom vehicle, and the official theory shifted to a transient predator, a stranger who had passed through their idyllic town and stolen its brightest light. Sarah clung to this theory because the alternative, that the answer was closer, hidden within the community itself, was too terrible to contemplate. But the brown sedan was never found. The days turned into weeks. The search parties of volunteers, once hundreds strong, dwindled to a few dozen, then a handful of die-hard neighbors. The news vans, which had camped out on her street, packed up and moved on to the next tragedy. The flood of casseroles and condolences slowed to a trickle. The world, which had stopped in solidarity with her pain, began to spin again. But Sarah remained frozen in the amber of that Saturday afternoon. Time became her tormentor. It moved forward for everyone else, marked by birthdays and holidays. But for her, it was a flat circle of grief. The first year was a raw, open wound. The second was a dull, constant ache. By the 5th, the ache had settled deep into her bones, a permanent part of who she was. She held an annual vigil in Meadow Creek Park on October 12th. The first year, the crowd was large, their candles a sea of defiant light against the darkness. By the 10th year, it was just Sarah, 2 of her oldest friends, and a handful of reporters who still found the story worth a brief mention. Lily's 10th birthday was the worst. Sarah spent the day in her daughter's bedroom, a space she had preserved as a perfect time capsule of 1996. The unicorn bedspread was still neatly made. The collection of colorful glass animals still sat on the dresser, and on the small art desk, the sketchbook lay open to Lily's last completed drawing, a smiling sun with sprawling friendly arms. Sarah picked it up, her fingers tracing the waxy crayon lines. She had begged the police to check it for fingerprints, for any clue, but they had assured her it was meaningless. Sitting there in the profound, crushing silence of the house, Sarah felt a hollowness so complete it threatened to swallow her whole. The woman who was once vibrant and full of laughter faded, replaced by a quiet, haunted figure. The light in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a permanent sadness. Friends would see her in the grocery store and not know what to say, offering tight, pained smiles before hurrying down another aisle. She eventually quit her job at the local library, the forced cheerfulness and small talk becoming an unbearable performance. The Meadow Creek Community Center, once a place of joy, became a specter. When the town finally closed it down due to budget cuts 5 years after Lily's disappearance, Sarah felt a strange sense of relief. Its slow decay into a boarded-up, graffiti-covered derelict seemed to mirror her own internal landscape. It was a monument to her loss. 15 years after Lily vanished, Sarah was in the produce section of the grocery store, mechanically weighing apples. She was in her late 40s now, a woman who had learned to navigate the world by making herself as small and unnoticeable as possible. A raspy voice called her name. She turned to see Arthur Peterson, stooped and frail now, leaning heavily on his shopping cart. He looked ancient, his face a roadmap of wrinkles behind his thick glasses. He didn't offer the usual empty platitudes. He simply looked at her, his expression one of profound, shared sorrow. He shuffled closer. "I still think about her, you know," he said, his voice barely a whisper. "She was such a special little artist." He shook his head slowly, as if marveling at the injustice of it all. A true tragedy that the world was robbed of that gift. For a moment Sarah's defenses crumbled. In a town that had learned to walk on eggshells around her grief, this frail old man was naming the specific, unique core of her loss. Not just her daughter, but her daughter's voice, her art. It felt like an act of profound empathy. She gave him a weak, grateful smile, her eyes welling up. "Thank you, Arthur," she managed to say. "That means a lot." He simply nodded, a silent, knowing compatriot in her pain, before pushing his cart down the aisle. As she watched him go, she felt a fleeting sense of connection, a shared memory of the little girl with the yellow bird. It was the deepest and most devastating deception of all, the monster, hiding in the light, comforting the mother of the child he had destroyed. The year is 2021. 25 years have passed since Lily Miller disappeared, a quarter of a century. For Sarah, the time has been both an eternity and a single, unending moment of loss. The news arrived not with a knock on the door, but as a small announcement in the Harmony Creek Gazette, the long-abandoned Meadow Creek Community Center, a blight on the town's landscape, was officially slated for demolition. For most residents, it was a welcome development. For Sarah, it was an alarm. Her mind didn't go to the broken windows or the crumbling facade. It went straight to a specific spot on an interior wall, to a fading painting of a small, yellow bird with impossible blue wings. It was the last piece of Lily that existed in public, the last testament to her life that wasn't confined to a box of memories in Sarah's closet. And Sarah decided, with a clarity of purpose she hadn't felt in years, that she would not let it be turned into rubble. A week later, she stood before the Harmony Creek Town Council. The woman who addressed them was not the frantic, grieving mother of 1996. This was a composed, articulate woman in her 50s, her voice steady. She didn't speak of her daughter's cold case. She spoke of history, of art, and of memory. She argued that the mural was a snapshot of a generation of the town's children, a piece of shared heritage that deserved to be preserved. Her plea was so logical, so filled with a quiet, undeniable dignity, that the council members were moved. They looked at this woman who had endured the town's greatest tragedy, asking not for justice, but only to save a piece of painted plaster. They unanimously granted her request. The day of the removal was overcast, the gray sky fitting the somber mood of the derelict building. Sarah stood inside the old gymnasium, the air thick with the smell of dust and decay, watching as a crew of art restoration specialists prepared to operate. They worked with the precision of surgeons, scoring the wall and planning their cuts. Sarah's heart pounded with a nervous energy she couldn't explain. This felt important, final. The work was painstaking. Hours passed as the crew carefully worked to free the large panel containing Lily's bird. As two workers maneuvered the heavy section of wall away from its framing, a long, vertical crack shot down the plaster near the floor. It was an unexpected break. One of the workers stopped, peering into the dark, narrow cavity of the wall. "Hold on," he said, his voice muffled by his dust mask. "There's something in here." He reached into the gap between the wooden studs, his fingers searching. After a moment, he pulled out a single folded piece of paper coated in a thick layer of dust. He looked at it, then at Sarah, who was standing frozen a few feet away, her eyes wide. He walked over and placed it gently in her outstretched hands. The paper was old, brittle. Her hands trembled as she carefully unfolded it. It was a child's drawing, and she knew with an instantaneous certainty that defied all logic that it was Lily's. The style was unmistakable, the bold crayon strokes, the unique way she drew faces. But this was not one of Lily's happy drawings. This was a drawing of a nightmare. It depicted two figures. One was small, a girl in a red coat, her face drawn with a round, open-mouthed Lily symbol for a scream, for pure terror. The other figure was tall and looming, a man in round glasses. In his hand, he held a set of keys, and from the keychain dangled a single prominent letter, A. The tall man was holding the little girl's hand, but he wasn't guiding her. He was pulling her, and with his other hand he was pointing toward a door over which Lily had scrawled a single word in shaky block letters, Fogo. Her 7-year-old mind trying to spell the phonetic sound of the word she'd seen on the sign, the word for fire, the word for the boiler room. The air left Sarah's lungs. The gymnasium, the workers, the entire world dissolved. There was only the drawing. It wasn't just a picture. It was a map. It was a note. It was an accusation, delivered 25 years late. It was her daughter, reaching out from across an impossible chasm of time, telling her everything. As Sarah stood there, paralyzed by the horror in her hands, she couldn't possibly have understood the psychology that allowed this moment to happen. It wasn't an oversight. For the killer, hiding this drawing was not a risk. It was the ultimate expression of his power. It was a trophy from his perfect crime, a secret so dark and so absolute that he felt the need to preserve it. To hide the evidence of his sin behind the victim's own innocent, public art was an act of supreme, twisted arrogance. It was a private joke shared between a monster and his memory, a secret he was sure would be buried forever, turning a child's silent scream into his own silent victory. He never counted on a mother who refused to let her daughter's memory turn to dust. Sarah Miller didn't drive home from the community center. She drove straight to the Harmony Creek Police Department, her knuckles white on the steering wheel. She bypassed the front desk, the drawing held tight in a protective plastic folder she'd grabbed from her car. The timid, withdrawn woman of the last 25 years was gone, replaced by someone with a terrifying, singular focus. She walked into the detective's unit and announced to the first officer she saw, her voice devoid of any tremor, "You need to reopen the case of Lily Miller. I have evidence." The file, thick with dust and disappointment, landed on the desk of Detective Isabella Rossi. Rossi was new to Harmony Creek, a sharp, big-city transplant who had taken the job to escape the burnout of urban homicide. She had read the Miller case file when she first arrived, seeing it as the town's foundational tragedy. Now, the mother from that tragedy was sitting across from her, her eyes burning with an intensity that Rossi had seen only a few times before. Rossi listened without interruption as Sarah recounted the story of the mural and the discovery, her gaze fixed on the impossible drawing laid out between them. She saw what the original investigators never could, not the tragic doodling of a child, but a coherent narrative, a witness statement from the grave. Within the hour, the cold case was hot. Detective Rossi bagged the drawing herself, sending it express to the state crime lab with a request for priority analysis. Then she descended into the police station's archives, a basement room that smelled of aging paper and forgotten stories. She located the boxes labeled Miller Lily, pulled one from the shelf, and blew a quarter-century of dust from its lid. For the rest of the day, she lived in 1996, immersing herself in faded witness statements, dead-end leads, and the ghosts of a failed investigation. The first break came with a call from the crime lab the next morning. The forensic analyst was unequivocal. The paper was a generic, low-grade art stock consistent with materials used in schools in the 1990s. The crayon wax contained pigments that were also period-specific. Most importantly, the analyst noted the near-total lack of light degradation. The drawing hadn't been sitting in a box. It had been kept in near-total darkness for a very, very long time. The drawing was authentic. It was a time capsule. Energized, Rossi dove back into the files. She found the transcript of the original interview with the witness, Arthur Peterson. She read his detailed description of the suspicious brown sedan, and it now struck her as overly elaborate, a beautifully constructed piece of misdirection. She scanned his physical description, taken down by a patrolman. Male, mid-50s, tall, slender. Build. Wears glasses. It was something, but not enough. She kept digging, flipping through page after page of supplementary reports. Tucked into the back of a folder, she found a miscellaneous collection of items from the time, including a clipped article from the Harmony Creek Gazette, dated August 1996, a cheerful community spotlight piece about the center and its dedicated staff. There was a photograph accompanying the article, a picture of a smiling Arthur Peterson posing with a broom in the gymnasium. Rossi stared at the grainy newsprint. He was tall, slender, and wearing the same thick, round glasses described in the report. And there, hanging from a loop on his belt, was a ring of keys. On the keychain was a small leather fob. Stamped into the center of the fob was a large, ornate letter A. Rossi felt a cold chill run down her spine. It was him. Sarah was at home, pacing her living room, unable to eat or sleep. Every ring of the phone sent a jolt through her. When it finally came, she snatched it from the receiver. It was Rossi. The detective's voice was calm, professional, but beneath it, Sarah could hear a current of excitement. Rossi didn't waste time. She laid out the facts, the lab's confirmation, the witness statement, the photograph, the keychain, and then she said the name. Sarah, we believe the man in the drawing is Arthur Peterson. The name landed in the silence of Sarah's house like a physical blow. Arthur Peterson, the kindly janitor, the frail old man in the grocery store, the person who had looked her in the eye and shared her grief. A wave of nausea so profound it made her knees weak washed over her. It wasn't just that he was a suspect. It was the betrayal, the monstrous 25-year-long performance. The man she had felt a moment of connection with, of gratitude toward, was the face of her daughter's murderer. The floor beneath her feet, which had already fractured once, now disintegrated into nothing. With a prime suspect identified, the investigation moved with a speed that was dizzying to Sarah. Detective Rossi asked her to come back to the station, to walk through the events of that day one more time. They sat in a quiet interview room, the horrifying drawing lying on the table between them. Sarah, Rossi said gently, I need you to think about Arthur Peterson. Every single memory you have of him, no matter how small or insignificant it seems. We're looking at him through a new lens now. Sarah closed her eyes, forcing herself back across the chasm of 25 years. She pictured the community center, the scent of paint and chalk dust. She saw Arthur in the background, a ghost in janitor's overalls. And then, triggered by the drawing on the table, a dormant memory flickered to life, replaying with sickening clarity. She remembered the moment Arthur had handed Lily that specific piece of paper. He had crouched down to the little girl's level, his smile avuncular and kind. This paper is special, he had signed, a clumsy imitation of the real language. It's for your secret art. the drawings that are too good for everyone else to see. You can hide them in a special place that only we know about." At the time, it had seemed like a charming, innocent secret between a child and a kindly old man. Now, the words were dripping with poison. It was grooming. It was premeditation. Sarah's eyes snapped open, and she looked at Rossi, the horror fresh on her face. He told her to hide it, she whispered. He gave her the paper for her secret art. It was the piece of the psychological puzzle that Rossi needed, transforming the crime from a potential act of panic into a calculated, manipulative hunt. Armed with this, Rossi and her partner drove to the address they had for Arthur Peterson, a small, immaculately neat house on a quiet street, the lawn perfectly manicured. He answered the door himself, looking even more frail and harmless up close than he had in the grocery store. He feigned a gentle confusion, inviting the detectives inside as if they were neighbors dropping by for a chat. They sat in his pristine living room, a room that smelled of lemon polish and old books. Rossi wasted no time. She placed a high-quality photograph of the drawing on the polished coffee table. "Mr. Peterson," she began, "we've reopened the Lily Miller case. Does this drawing mean anything to you?" Arthur Peterson's performance was masterful. First he squinted at the photo, bringing it close to his thick glasses, feigning the cognitive slowness of old age. "Oh my," he murmured. "That was so long ago. My memory. It isn't what it used to be." When Rossi pressed, explaining where the drawing was found, his demeanor shifted to flat denial. "I'm sorry, Detective. I wish I could help you, but I barely knew the child. There were so many children at the center." When Rossi pointed out the figure in the drawing with the glasses and the keychain, the mask of the kindly grandfather slipped away, replaced by a flash of cold venom. "That's ridiculous," he snapped, his voice suddenly sharp. "That girl, she was a strange little thing, always off in her own world, and her mother, well, she was young. She never watched her properly. It's no wonder the poor thing wandered off." He leaned back, his expression now one of indignation, attempting to paint himself as the victim of a wild accusation. Rossi had anticipated the denials, the character assassination, the classic narcissistic defense. She didn't argue. Instead, she let a moment of silence hang in the air before changing her line of attack. She leaned forward, her voice dropping to an almost conversational tone. "You know, Arthur," she said, "it's funny how old information can suddenly become relevant. An anonymous tip from 1996 just resurfaced. We never could substantiate it back then, but now it's starting to make sense." She paused, watching him. The tip was very specific. It mentioned the boiler room, so we're securing a warrant to bring in a team with ground-penetrating radar. They're going to do a full scan of the concrete floor tomorrow morning. It was a complete fabrication. There was no old tip, but the words were a surgical strike. For a quarter of a century, Arthur Peterson had built a fortress of lies around himself, brick by painstaking brick. And in a single second, Detective Rossi's words found the one loose stone. For a flicker of a moment, his composure shattered. His eyes widened almost imperceptibly. A muscle in his jaw twitched. He quickly raised a hand to wipe away a single bead of sweat that had formed on his temple, a gesture he tried to disguise as him rubbing his forehead. He recovered almost instantly, scoffing at the idea, but it was too late. The mask had cracked, and Detective Rossi, watching him with the undivided attention of a hawk, had seen the monster peeking through. She had him. She knew where to dig. Detective Rossi's bluff had given her the probable location, but she needed proof. Armed with her testimony of Arthur's reaction, she secured a warrant. The next morning, a forensic team converged on the condemned Meadow Creek Community Center, their destination the one place that had never been searched, the dark, damp boiler room in the basement. The ground-penetrating radar unit emitted a low, rhythmic pulse as an officer slowly scanned the cracked concrete floor. And then, in a corner, near the hulking, rusted boiler itself, the screen flashed with an anomaly, a section of the floor that was denser and showed clear signs of soil disturbance beneath it. The sound of a jackhammer shattered the 25-year-old silence of the room, a violent and necessary intrusion into the past. The team broke through the concrete, revealing the dark, packed earth below. They switched to hand tools, digging with the careful precision of archaeologists. Hours passed under the harsh glare of portable worklights. Then a technician paused, his trowel having uncovered a small swatch of fabric. It was a faded, dirty red. As he gently brushed the surrounding dirt away, more was revealed: a small shoe, a delicate bone, and then a glint of tarnished metal. It was a child's silver charm bracelet, adorned with a tiny smiling sun. Sarah had bought it for Lily on her 7th birthday. The long, silent search was finally over. The truth of what happened that Saturday afternoon was, in the end, as simple as it was monstrous. Arthur Peterson was a man who lived for secrets, for the feeling of power that came from knowing something no one else did. He was a predator who wore the camouflage of harmlessness. He had watched Lily for weeks, fascinated by her silence, by the way she lived in her own vibrant world. He saw her deafness not as a disability, but as an opportunity. He groomed her with small kindnesses, positioning himself as her special, secret friend. On that day, he had lured her away from the mural with the promise of showing her something magical in the basement. When they were alone in the boiler room, the little girl finally sensed the danger, her internal alarm bells screaming. She tried to run, but he was waiting. He hadn't planned to kill her, not initially, but when she panicked, he did what he had to do to protect his secret, to silence the one person who could expose him. A week later, he mixed a small batch of concrete and patched the floor himself, telling the center's director he was simply repairing a crack he'd noticed. And for 25 years, his secret remained safe, buried under 6 inches of solid stone. The arrest was quiet. There were no sirens. 2 police cruisers glided to a stop in front of Arthur Peterson's immaculate home. Detective Rossi walked up the neat pathway and knocked on the door. When Arthur opened it, he was in his bathrobe, a cup of coffee in his hand. He saw the grim, determined look on Rossi's face, saw her partner standing on the steps behind her, and he knew. The performance of a lifetime was over. The mask of the frail, kindly grandfather did not just crack, it evaporated. In its place was a chilling emptiness, a flat reptilian gaze of pure, unadulterated resentment. He said nothing as Rossi informed him he was under arrest for the murder of Lily Miller. The only sound was the sharp, metallic click of the handcuffs, locking around his thin, wrinkled wrists. Sarah did not see the arrest in person. She saw it, as the rest of the town did, on the 6 o'clock news. She sat on her sofa, her hands clasped together, as the news anchor announced the stunning breakthrough. And then the footage filled the screen. It was him, Arthur Peterson, his face pale and sunken, being guided into the back of a police car. The camera lingered on his face, the face of the man she had pitied in the grocery store. In that moment there was no victory for Sarah. There was no cathartic release. There was only the horrifying, absolute weight of the truth. The long, agonizing question mark that had defined more than half her life had finally been replaced by a period. But the final sentence was a horror story, and its closing word was the name of a man she had thought was a friend. The uncertainty was gone, but the peace she had prayed for was nowhere to be found. The town of Harmony Creek braced for a trial that would force it to confront the monster it had harbored for decades. But that trial would never come. 3 months after his arrest, before he could enter a plea or offer a single word of explanation, Arthur Peterson died of a massive heart attack in his prison cell. He slipped away quietly in his sleep, an end so peaceful it felt like a final, mocking injustice. He had received a quiet, anticlimactic death while he had sentenced Sarah to a lifetime of loud, agonizing grief. There would be no public reckoning, no day in court for Sarah to face him. The final chapter of the legal story was left unwritten. For Sarah, the months that followed were a strange, new reality. The gnawing, restless energy of uncertainty that had propelled her for 25 years was gone, and in its place was a heavy, dense stillness. The question of happened to Lily had been answered. Now she was left with the crushing weight of, and The world no longer looked at her as the mother of a missing girl, but as the mother of a murdered one. The whispers of pity were replaced by looks of awe at her resilience, but both felt isolating. The truth had set her free from the prison of not knowing, but it had locked her in the solitary confinement of the gruesome facts. For a time it seemed that the sheer weight of it all might pull her under, but the same fierce maternal devotion that had driven her to save a painted mural now demanded a different kind of preservation. It demanded that Lily's story not end in a dark boiler room. Sarah sold the house she had lived in for 30 years, the house she had brought her baby girl home to. With that money and an outpouring of donations from a community desperate for redemption, she established the Lily's Voice Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to funding art programs for deaf and hard-of-hearing children. She would ensure that other children who lived in a world of silence would always have the tools to make their voices heard. 2 years later, a local art gallery hosted the first Lily's Voice exhibit. The walls, once sterile and white, were now an explosion of color, covered in the beautifully chaotic and brilliant artwork of children. Sarah walked through the crowded room, not as a figure of tragedy, but as the Foundation's proud director. For the first time in decades, the smile on her face was genuine, reaching her eyes. She paused before a small easel where a little girl, no older than Lily, had been, was completely absorbed, her tongue sticking out in concentration as she painted a large, magnificent bird with wings of bright, impossible blue. The little girl looked up, her eyes bright, and saw Sarah watching. She smiled, and her hands began to move, signing with childish enthusiasm. "I love to paint birds." Sarah's breath caught in her throat. A wave of memory and pain and love washed over her, so intense it was dizzying. But this time it did not break her. She smiled back, a real warm smile, and raised her own hands. "Me too," she sighed. "Birds are the best." In that small, silent exchange, a cycle of pain that had begun a lifetime ago was finally transformed into a legacy of hope, of color, of creation.